Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 drama. Aston Martin have given another reason as to why they could well be a force to be reckoned with here in the upcoming season, with team principal Mike Krack suggesting that Fernando Alonso is a clear upgrade on four-time world champion Sebastian Vettel they had for the last couple of years. Is this unfair on Vettel, or is this a fair point in terms of Aston Martin's progression going into 2023? Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Plenty to discuss. Going into the season, of course, most are expecting Red Bull to be the team to beat. Mark Webber says here they're expected to come up the blocks fastest of anyone. Mercedes, Ferrari should also be in the conversation, hopefully. So the question to me that's kind of interesting though, who is going to be the best of the rest? Of course, this season it was quite clearly Lando, Norris and the McLaren, but the Alpine was actually probably the fourth best car over the course of the year. Alonso had a great season individually, but of course various reliability issues, and also the fact that clearly Alpine wanted to get rid of him at some point to bring Piastri in, frustrated him, and he wanted to move to a team with more ambition than Aston Martin certainly have. Whether they can capitalise on that, who knows? But as F1 say here, right, who do you reckon is going to be the surprise package of 2023? The package sounds to me like kind of car-driver combination, and I would like to say Aston Martin. Maybe I'm getting biased here by all of the great PR spin they've been giving out over the last few days, but it's not stopping, baby. Like, the trade continues from the Aston Martin camp. So if you guys are unfamiliar with what they've been saying over the last couple of weeks, saying that they've changed more than 90% of their parts from their last year's car to this year's car, also calling out other teams and saying that other teams in the midfield, they say they can fight for wins, that in 3 years they'll be winning, in 100 races they'll be winning. I'm pretty sure even Zach Brown from McLaren said the other day that, yeah, it's going to be about 2-3 years time until they can consistently fight for race wins, but I'm pretty sure he said something like that like 2 or 3 years ago, right? So this is the point that Mike Krack is making, that they're actually the most ambitious team of everyone in that midfield. And yes, they had a bit of a tractor at the start of last season, but in terms of progression, they made arguably the most of any team last year. And Mike Krack's like, look, what are these other teams doing to win? At least we have a plan that we're trying to execute on. They also mentioned some clever innovations they're bringing to the new car. We'll see how clever these turn out to be. Of course, we know what they tried out in Hungary last year with a kind of strange looking rear wing, which I believe has now been outlawed. But they also say it's great when you find a small loophole that you can use to your advantage. Not often you can base your entire car around it. Instead, it's essential to get the basics right. Then you could add things, but they're saying that there's a few clever innovations that are the icing on the cake. So they reckon they're taking some big steps forward, not just in their car, but also from the driver's side as well. And this is what Mike Krack says on that front, right? So on all angles of attack, Aston Martin are going pretty hard here. Mike Krack saying that Alonso's hunger will push Aston Martin forward. Sebastian Vettel obviously retired last season. He's a four-time world champion, but he's a different person. He made the decision to retire, while Fernando chose to continue longer. It changes the motivation of the team. This is the full quote here from Mike Krack, basically saying that Alonso is going to be an upgrade, not necessarily in terms of raw peak performance and skill, but as it stands, Fernando is a better pick than Vettel, which obviously makes sense because Vettel's retired, but even compared to the Vettel of last season, they reckon Alonso's a big step up. Of course, Alonso only a two-time world champion, Vettel a four-time world champion, but the numbers in that sense don't really mean that much, as Mike Krack says. That's a good question. Seb's a four-time world champion, but it changes the motivation bringing Fernando in. There's a dynamic in the team that revolves around that. We're grateful for what Sebastian has brought. He took the team to a new level, but the combination of the investments behind it and Fernando's hunger is what makes us have even more progress. And they reckon that since Fernando stepped into the car, the Aston Martin, like last year sometime, after he was Sainz, he immediately was giving a lot of good insight into how they wanted to develop their car. They say that their car's been developed a fair bit around Alonso's suggestions. So we'll see how that combination works, because of course there is the argument there with Lawrence Stroll in charge of the team, owning the team, and Lance Stroll being a driver, that maybe certain upgrades might go to Stroll first rather than Alonso, who should clearly be the number one driver. Might not work out like that. We'll see how fiery Fernando is when it comes to those type of discussions, given that his boss is kind of his teammate's dad, which is unfortunate in a sense. He even compares Alonso to Valentino Rossi and saying that when you're motivated, age isn't really, doesn't matter too much. When the motivation is there, plus the dedication, the physical and mental preparation is talent and experience. I don't think it's just that there's a little time left in Alonso. So pretty interesting statement there. Also kind of doubling down on the fact that we are the more serious team compared to the other midfielders. Our ambitions are credible, like with the wind tunnel, the factory, the new simulators. We are serious. We have huge investment behind our bid. That's why it was clear to Fernando so quickly. We didn't even need to convince him to come here. He already knew. He has contacts everywhere. We are credible. We don't just talk, we act. So, I mean, here we go. Alonso are gone for the full Ferrari mode, PR positive spin. But are they speaking facts, or is this complete BS? Because last season, these were how the drivers themselves ranked the top 10 10 drivers of 2022. Verstappen, Leclerc, Hamilton, Russell were tied for third, Norris, and then Alonso was sixth. I believe also the team principals put Alonso about around this category as well, and I think it's fair enough. The top drivers were quite clearly Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell, Hamilton, whether you want to put them different order, who knows. Norris was there or thereabouts as well, but I do think that Alonso, given the car that he had and the reliability problems that he had a phenomenal season really individually, and even himself, he said that he was frustrated with the way the season went because he had a lot of points left on the table due to various issues with the car over the season when he felt like he was driving at a very high level, which I'm inclined to agree with. The drivers also ranked Vettel at about joint 8th here, so in terms of last year's performance, it makes sense, right? Vettel was on the fence, would he retire, would he not retire, made the call to retire, and therefore last season the motivation isn't quite going to be there like Alonso's is, and I mean, it's remarkable that Alonso still has the motivation and the ability at the age that he is, but it's great to see, and yeah, hopefully he's not going away anytime soon, and obviously the experience he can bring to the Aston Martin team as well, they believe it's going to be a significant upgrade on what Vettel could have brought. Not that in terms of peak level, Alonso or Vettel are a better driver, but for right now, for what the team needs, Alonso, I think, is quite clearly a better fit than Vettel, and potentially can push them further forwards than Vettel was able to do last year. And of course, last season, their progress was pretty immense. This is, I mean, it's not really great analysis here that Formula One did. This is between Bahrain and the Austin Grand Prix, or the US Grand Prix in Austin, Texas, and all they're comparing here is the qualifying times, comparing what it was in Bahrain in race 1 compared to the USA. And Mercedes were actually only about 6.5 tenths off back at Bahrain and about 7 tenths off again at Austin. So, but in terms of race pace, it was a rather different story at this time in the season. Red Bull were far quicker in a race than Ferrari were. Mercedes are far quicker even than Ferrari were in race pace and stuff. So it doesn't tell the whole picture, this analysis, but it does nonetheless show that Aston Martin, from being a complete tractor at the start of the season and routinely having but double Q3 exits, by the time they got to Austin, to the US Grand Prix, towards the end of the season, they started to be a pretty competitive car in the midfield. I think even Vettel led one lap of this race, right, towards the end of the season when he pitted later than the other guys did. Whether that was a good strategy, whether it was a bad strategy, questions on that. But even this was between Bahrain and race 12, where Aston Martin had equally gained a fair bit of time compared to where they was looking like in Bahrain. So I think it goes to show that Aston Martin made some great progress last year. If they can continue that trend, hopefully it's an exciting time for the competition across the entirety of the grid. But do you buy the Aston Martin PR machine here saying they're going to be on fire? Do you think they can actually be the 4th best team next season? Can they be even better than 4th? Seems incredibly unlikely, budget cap constraints and all this type of stuff, but at least they're taking things seriously, and they believe Alonso is the man to get them where they need to be. Speaking of driver performances, got to mention some funny quotes I thought on Tsunoda. Big year, I would say, for Alpha Tauri as well. They come through with Yuki Tsunoda. Now he's been in Formula One for a few years. They've got Nick de Vries as well. Probably wouldn't have been my first choice driver to go alongside Tsunoda, but of course, they've got to deliver now. Tsunoda's been making some progress the last couple of years. You know, he's been getting better. Is he where he needs to be yet? I don't think so, but he's got some good raw pace in there. And even Franz Tost from Alpha Tauri says this: it's not that Yuki has one big deficiency. No, he is quite good. He is there, but he has to improve in all other aspects to achieve the next level, which is probably a fair and good analysis. I do think this is quite funny though. If you guys follow Counter-Strike at all at any esports, you might be aware of this kind of copy pasta which has been thrown around a while, which basically goes, this player is fantastic, just needs to work on communication, aim, map awareness, crosshair placement, all this type of stuff. And it's kind of like what Franz Tost is saying, when it's like, yeah, Yuki Tsunoda, fantastic driver. He just needs to work on his qualifying, his race pace, his defense, his overtaking ability, his EOS management, his tire management, his tire warm-up, you know, all this other stuff. And, you know, basically was what he was getting at there. But still, I think he makes a fair point. I do wonder, though, what's going to happen with AlphaTauri this upcoming season, because I think, like, I highly doubt there's a world in which both of those drivers remain going into 2024, with lots of other exciting Red Bull Junior prospects coming up through the ranks right now. They're trying to prepare Liam Lawson to step into one of those seats by sending him to Super Formula. So I do think a big series or big season for both of those guys, and also for Tsunoda to show that in, you know, a few years into his career, he actually can be the driver that people have kind of seen from him at times and expect him to be. If he just doesn't bin it into the wall so often coming out of the pit lane, that would be a pretty good start, I think. Just to close out the video, the Race of Champions was going on. Thought this is quite nice. Of course, Ekstrom here on the right-hand side, a legendary Swedish driver with Michael Schumacher, and then today with Mick Schumacher, as they were both in the finals here. Ekstrom took down Mick Schumacher in the finals here, unfortunately. I think it was Mick versus Seb in the semis, actually, and arguably Seb kind of let Mick win a fair bit, which I think is understandable as well. Led him through to the finals. Unfortunately, he went down at the end of it, but yeah, I believe this was the statistics here. I think Vettel maybe made a bit of a mistake, actually. So maybe they were having a proper race, and it wasn't just Vettel letting Mick win and go through to the finals. But some quite nice stuff to see regardless. So very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.